Effects of assets on attitudes and behaviors. One source. This paper investigates the intricate relationship between individuals' asset holdings and their attitudes and behaviors, particularly as a potential mechanism to advance social policy and reduce poverty. The authors analyze a longitudinal dataset spanning from 1968 to 1972 to understand how assets, such as house value and savings, influence various dimensions of life, including prudence, efficacy, horizons, connectedness, and effort. Their research explores the theoretical underpinnings of asset-building interventions and empirically tests whether changes in asset levels correspond with shifts in these attitudinal and behavioral outcomes. Ultimately, the study aims to contribute to the understanding of how asset accumulation might foster positive individual and societal changes, informing the design of effective social programs. How many effects of assets are on attitudes and behaviors? The source, 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, does not explicitly state a specific number of effects of assets on attitudes and behaviors as a defined list. However, the study presented in the excerpts investigates the effects of asset holding on 5 specific attitudinal and behavioral variables: prudence, efficacy, horizons, connectedness, effort. The study analyzes how variables like house value, savings, and income, as measures of assets, relate to these 5 attitudes and behaviors over time. The results discuss the significant effects found between these asset variables and the 5 attitudinal and behavioral outcomes.
Summarize example questions to ask for information for Prudence Index. Based on the source 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, the prudence variable was measured using a modified form of the Risk Avoidance Index developed by the Panel Study of Income Dynamics, PSID. The Prudence Index in 1968 was adjusted to include labor market earnings, public and private income transfers, rent, and total family money income. The construction of the Prudence Index involved summing an index developed by the PSID staff from a combination of asset variables and standardized responses to specific types of questions. These questions pertain to auto insurance, questions about whether the individual had auto insurance, medical insurance, questions about whether the individual had medical insurance, personal smoking habits, questions about whether the individual smoked cigarettes. Therefore, to gather information for the Prudence Index, the PSID designed questions to determine an individual's status regarding auto insurance coverage, medical insurance coverage, and smoking habits. It's important to note that the source does not provide the exact wording of these questions. Instead, it explains the types of information collected to construct the Prudence Index, which is related to an individual's level of risk avoidance in these specific areas. The underlying concept was to use these as proxy measures for prudent behavior related to financial security and health. Summarize example questions to ask for information for Efficacy Index. Based on the source 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, the Efficacy Index was developed by PSID staff and was based on respondents' expectations regarding the future. The index aimed to measure a general personal sense of effectiveness and confidence about the future. While the source does not provide the exact wording of the questions, they would have likely been structured to understand how individuals perceived their ability to influence their future and their general outlook. Example topics that these questions might have covered include anticipated future life satisfaction, questions about how the respondent expected their life to be in the future, perceived control over future events, questions gauging the extent to which respondents felt they could shape their future outcomes, optimism about achieving goals, questions exploring the respondent's confidence in reaching their future aspirations. Therefore, to summarize, example questions to gather information for the Efficacy Index would likely focus on an individual's general expectations, sense of control, and optimism concerning their future life. The PSID staff developed specific questions to capture these aspects, though the exact wording is not provided in the excerpt. Summarize example questions to ask for information for Horizons Index. Based on the source 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, the Horizons Index was measured using responses to questions about moving to obtain a new job, This indicates a forward-looking perspective related to career advancement. Having more children. This suggests planning for the future of the family. Having educational goals for one's children. This demonstrates a focus on the long-term development and future of the next generation. Therefore, to summarize, example questions to gather information for the Horizons Index would likely focus on an individual's plans and expectations related to job mobility, family size, and the educational aspirations for their children. What does connectedness means in this document? According to the source 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, connectedness refers to the extent to which a head of household was involved in sources of information and help. The Connectedness Index determined the extent to which the individual was in contact with relatives and neighbors or was active in certain organizations. The document further elaborates that contact with relatives and neighbors or belonging to organizations, and use of the media are hypothesized to enhance opportunities for information and its potential use. Specifically, the Connectedness Index was computed using 6 specific variables that assessed attendance and participation in neighborhood clubs or organizations, church or religious organizations, labor unions, parent-teacher associations, PTA, or other school-related groups, fraternal or lodge groups, farm organizations.
What does effort means in this document? According to the source, 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, effort was measured by the total earning money income, or the income/needs ratio that resulted in non-money income. The effort index was constructed from responses to questions on the extent of on-the-money repair, car repair, home gardening, and other productive accumulation activities undertaken in one's spare time. Therefore, in this document, effort pertains to activities undertaken to generate income or produce goods/services, like home repair or gardening, outside of regular employment, reflecting a level of proactive engagement in improving one's economic well-being. Why house value, savings, incomes are key assets. House value, savings, and income are considered key assets in the study presented in 6 Effects of Assets.pdf for several important reasons. Directly measure variables. The study explicitly states that variables such as house value, savings, and income are directly observed and are used as the attitude and behavior variables, and the savings variable is derived by the PSID staff from a weight index using information and aggregation of responses to specific set of observed variables. Furthermore, the section on variables of theoretical and policy interest clearly lists house value, savings, and income as the independent variables examined for their effects on attitudes and behaviors. Table 6.1 also presents descriptive statistics for house value, savings, income, and behavior variables, further establishing these as the primary asset measures under analysis. Common indicators of economic well-being. Intuitively, house value represents a significant form of wealth and potential security for many households. Savings directly reflect accumulated financial resources available for future use or in times of need. Income is a measure of the flow of resources into a household, which can contribute to both current consumption and future savings. These 3 variables collectively provide a broad picture of a household's financial standing and potential. Focus of policy interest. The introduction of the document discusses President Clinton's 1994 welfare reform proposal, which aimed to increase asset limits and create special savings accounts. This highlights the policy relevance of assets, particularly savings, in addressing poverty and promoting individual development. The study's focus on these specific assets aligns with a broader interest in understanding how these tangible resources might influence less tangible aspects like attitudes and behaviors. Empirical examination of effects. The core of the study involves empirically testing the relationships between these asset variables and the 5 attitudinal and behavioral outcomes: prudence, efficacy, horizons, connectedness, and effort. The results section discusses the significant effects found between house value, savings, and income, and these attitudes and behaviors. For instance, the study found that savings and house value has a significant positive effect in the predicted direction on 3 of the attitude and behavior variables. In summary, house value, savings, and income are key assets in this research because they are directly measured by the PSID, serve as fundamental indicators of a household's economic situation, are relevant to policy discussions around asset building, and are the primary asset variables used to empirically investigate their effects on attitudes and behaviors within the study. What are conclusions and lessons learned from reading this document? Drawing on the information in the source, 6 Effects of Assets.pdf, several conclusions and lessons can be learned. Assets appear to have a positive influence on certain attitudes and behaviors. The study found significant positive effects of the 2 asset variables, savings and house value, on 3 of the attitude and behavior variables, prudence, efficacy, and horizons. This suggests that having more assets, particularly in the form of savings and home ownership, is associated with individuals being more forward-looking, having a greater sense of personal effectiveness, and exhibiting more risk-averse behaviors. The effects of income on attitudes and behaviors were less consistently significant in the analysis when controlling for other asset variables. This suggests that the stock of wealth, savings and house value, might be more influential on these psychological and behavioral outcomes than the flow of income alone. The study explored the alternative explanation that attitudes and behaviors might influence asset accumulation. While acknowledging this possibility, the findings suggest that assets also have an independent effect on attitudes and behaviors. This implies a potentially reciprocal relationship, but the study provides evidence for the influence of assets on these personal characteristics. The research highlights the potential importance of asset-based policies. Given the findings, policies aimed at helping individuals accumulate assets, particularly savings and home ownership, could have broader positive impacts beyond mere financial well-being, potentially fostering more prudent behavior, a greater sense of control over the future, and longer-term perspectives. The document mentions President Clinton's 1994 welfare reform proposal, which aimed to increase asset limits, indicating policy interest in this area. The study acknowledges methodological limitations, including the challenges of establishing causality definitively with the available longitudinal data. While the PSID data provides valuable insights over time, disentangling the precise causal pathways between assets and attitudes/behaviors is complex. The construction of the attitude and behavior indices relied on measures developed by the PSID staff, which aimed to capture the theoretical concepts of prudence, efficacy, horizons, connectedness, and effort through specific questions related to insurance, future expectations, plans for the future, social engagement, and productive activities. The concept of connectedness was specifically defined in this study as the extent to which the head of household was involved in sources of information and help, such as through contact with relatives and neighbors or participation in various organizations. Effort in this context was measured by indicators of activities undertaken to generate income or produce goods/services outside of regular employment, reflecting proactive engagement in economic well-being. In conclusion, the document provides evidence suggesting that asset holding, particularly in the form of savings and house value, is positively associated with more prudent, efficacious, and future-oriented attitudes and behaviors. This finding has potential implications for asset-building policies, although the study also acknowledges the complexity of the relationship and the need for further research to establish definitive causality.